So Final Fantasy XIV is a game that offers a ton of content for players of all calibers, guaranteed to keep players hooked to the game for a long time to come, but just like most marriages, sometimes it can be difficult to stay interested in just one game for so long, and naturally, you might want to try some other games, and so for this guide, I want to share with you all some games worth checking out if you liked Final Fantasy XIV. So, for the first one on this list, let's talk about other Final Fantasy games. So, for some of you, Final Fantasy XIV could be your first dive into the series, or you could be me, where Final Fantasy XIII was your first entry, only because when you were a kid you saw Lightning in the commercials and had a crush on her, only to play the games for like 5 minutes after renting it from a Blockbuster, only to remember that you don't like RPG games that aren't called Pokemon. But if you do like Final Fantasy XIV, then I highly recommend that you guys check out some of the older Final Fantasy games, and especially considering the amount of references and homages that Final Fantasy XIV has to the previous entries in the series, and once you play those, you'll be able to appreciate them a lot more when you come back to the game. And many may tell you to start with Final Fantasy VII, since that's the most popular one, or I guess most famous one, but personally, I would recommend checking out any of the Ivalice Final Fantasy games first and foremost. And so for the Ivalice Final Fantasy games, for those of you who aren't familiar, that would be either Final Fantasy Tactics, which is Fire Emblem meets Final Fantasy, Vagrant Story, an underrated spin-off set in the Ivalice universe, at least I think. I haven't actually played Vagrant Story yet. And of course, Final Fantasy XII, aka the greatest Star Wars video game ever made. And why, you might ask, I'm recommending the Ivalice games first and foremost? Well, that's mainly because of the amount of allusions that Final Fantasy XIV has to the previous Ivalice games in the series. The most obvious being the return to Ivalice Alliance Raid series in Stormblood, which is a huge love letter to all the fans of that sub-series of Final Fantasy. And some other allusions include Ul'dah being very reminiscent of Rabanastre, the inclusion of the Viera as a playable race, the Sky Pirates, the Ascians being loosely named after the Scions of Light in Final Fantasy XII, and there is a lot of similarities with the Garlean Empire and the Arcadian Empire, and there's honestly just too much to count. And some other Final Fantasy games I also recommend is Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI, the former serving as the inspiration for a lot of the story elements in Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker. I also recommend Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy XIII, and Final Fantasy VIII. Although, to be honest, I recommend checking out as many of them as you possibly can. The ones I mention are simply the ones with the most feature references from the top of my head. And another Final Fantasy game I also want to give a shout out to is Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, especially if you like Final Fantasy XIV's job system, you enjoy games like Dark Souls or Nioh, or you're a Sigma male who just wants to kill chaos and you like to skip cutscenes. But now, let's go on to other MMOs. So maybe you'd rather play another MMORPG rather than delving into some of the single player games on the list. That's completely okay too. There's a lot of other MMOs worth checking out on here. No, not that one. And for those that liked Final Fantasy XIV but want to try something else, the two MMOs that really come to mind are Elder Scrolls Online and Guild Wars 2. So, let me explain why. So for Elder Scrolls Online, it's currently one of the most popular MMORPGs on the market, and for good reason too. Along with being on PC, ESO is also available on Xbox and PlayStation, although I would personally recommend playing it on PC as with most MMOs, you know, unless you want to feel like you're looking at a PowerPoint presentation while in Cyrodiil trying to PvP. Like me when I tried to play PvP back on base Xbox One. Although if you want to play it on console, I would recommend getting it for the newer gen consoles if you have access to one. And why I recommend ESO, the amount of freedom that players get when starting this game is incredible. So pretty much you can choose wherever you want to go once you start the once you beat the tutorial, I mean. And while there are only 6 classes to choose from, they aren't your typical RPG classes. You can create a variety of different archetypes all on one character. So like for example, if you choose Templar, you can make something like a Paladin or a Priest. Dragon Knight, if you choose that, you could make your typical tanky knight that turns their skin into stone, or something akin to a pyromancer. With Nightblade, you can make something either like a rogue, a dark knight, or a warlock. Basically, what I'm saying is you can make your class whatever you want it to be, and there is absolutely no gear restriction. So if you want to be a tank wielding a bow and cloth armor, then you can do that. Theoretically, of course. I'm not entirely sure about the viability of such a build. And the way the game subscription works is pretty nice. It's the same price as Final Fantasy XIV's, but it's completely optional, and what you do get is access to all of the DLCs, minus the most recently released X-Pack, along with some bonuses like free in-game store currency, along with other bonuses like XP boosts, enhanced die mechanics, and let's say for example you pick up Final Fantasy XIV again, but still want to play ESO from time to time, then you can just let your subscription run out and just play it whenever you want. And the combat is a lot more action-oriented than its sister MMOs. And so while it's pretty engaging, it's one of the only MMORPGs that I think actually plays better with the controller, at least in my opinion. And next off, I want to talk about Guild Wars 2. So, while it's not as popular anymore as some of the other titles, Guild Wars 2 is still a pretty fun MMO to play. It's a free-to-play MMO with 3 expansions, the most recent of which actually came out this year, and it recently dropped on Steam too, and it has a fairly dedicated player base. So it's very similar to ESO, where the player is given a lot of freedom, although it uses a far more traditional class system where there are specializations or elite specs that allow you to add an extra flavor to your class, shall we say. And the game also has a pretty engaging and fleshed out story that's a part of Guild Wars 2 update system called the Living World. And while there are story quests, most of the quests, aka dynamic events, are more akin to something like Fates in Final Fantasy XIV, where they pop up in the game's world, allowing you to perform certain tasks for XP. And what's nice about this game is it gives you the option to choose between either a tab targeting system, but the game also offers the option to use an action camera as well, similar to ESO's camera, allowing players to use whichever, I guess, camera they prefer. And so, the last game on this list that I want to recommend are the Monster Hunter games, most particularly Monster Hunter World. So if you guys remember, Monster Hunter World did a crossover event with Final Fantasy XIV, albeit not as, I guess, grand of a scale like the Ivalice Final Fantasy games or the Nier Automata raids were, but during Stormblood, players could fight Rathalos in the form of an 8-man trial or a 4-man trial if you were playing on Extreme. And this fight is still available for players to this day, and if you like that, then I would definitely recommend picking up Monster Hunter World. Monster Hunter, if you don't know, is an action role-playing game where you play as a hunter that explores jungles, forests, and other various biomes to hunt monsters using a variety of unique weapons such as great swords, long swords, insect glaives, switch axes, and gun lances, as well as range weapons too, essentially turning the game into a third-person shooter if that's more your speed. And what's really cool is this game encourages you to play strategically by learning the environment around you, as well as the typical behavioral patterns of your prey. So if you're a huge Xenos fan that loves to hunt, then I cannot stress this game enough. You should check it out. And just like Final Fantasy XIV had a Monster Hunter World crossover event, Monster Hunter World did the exact same thing with Final Fantasy XIV, where players can hunt a behemoth, and one of the rewards is based off of the Dragoon's artifact set from A Realm Reborn. And Monster Hunter World also has crossover events for games such as Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, The Witcher 3, and Horizon Zero Dawn, at least for just the PS4 version of the game. And so as of right now, I recommend Monster Hunter World rather than the newest one, Rise, mainly because that's the only one that's currently available on all platforms, and because of its connection with Final Fantasy XIV. However, Monster Hunter Rise is also available on the Switch and PC, and they recently announced that the game will be coming to PlayStation and Xbox sometime next year. So, I haven't played Monster Hunter Rise yet, other than the demo, but I have heard nothing but good things about it, and I highly recommend checking it out. And to sum it up, Final Fantasy XIV is a great game, but sometimes you want to take a break, and that's completely understandable to just step away from the game and try new things. I'm pretty sure Yoshi P even said himself that it's okay to take a break every now and then. But if you're looking for new games to try during your break, or just in general, then I hope this video will give you guys an idea of what to do. Anyways guys, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Feel free to comment down below what games you like to play aside from Final Fantasy XIV, and what's your go-to game during a break. So, subscribe for more content, follow my socials in the description below, and I will see you all next time. You guys are the best. Umbruhh out.